Tokyo Beatdown is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that sees you controlling several members of a police squad who have earned a nickname due to their extreme methods of dealing with the criminal element, comprised of thieves, smugglers and assassins that run rampant on the streets of Tokyo. Now the story plays out through a series of really humorous cutscenes. The dialogue and situations found within the game are really quite charming. Normally beat-em-ups don't warrant much consideration of their narratives, but this one actually has some substance to it, as well as a ton of style. When it comes to gameplay, it is all classic beat-em-up. You walk left to right, and sometimes right to left, while beating up numerous amounts of enemies. Along the way there are barrels and crates to smash, which often contain food that serves as your means of regaining health. Your punches and kicks can be mixed up to form various combos, and if you are currently carrying a weapon, you can also mix a gunshot into your combo attacks, which massively increases the amount of damage you deal, although the fighting still ultimately feels a bit less varied than something like Streets of Rage 2. When it comes to visuals, this is a very nice looking DS game, featuring large detailed character models and visceral 3D backgrounds. There's a lot of variety to each of them, which helps the game from becoming stale. Although it never quite reaches the highs of the genre heavyweights like Final Fight or Streets of Rage, Tokyo Beatdown is still a competent game that is fun to pick up and play. The DS is no stranger to quality action platformers, but Aliens Infestation is a game that never got a fair shake. Much like the name suggests, it's based off the popular movie franchise, with the player taking on the role of one of 4 colonial marines as you try to restore contact with a colony whose last transmission included a strange and cryptic message. Now for fans of the movie, the narrative is really engaging and inserts itself into the Alien timeline quite nicely, but where the game truly comes into its own is within gameplay. It shares many similarities with the likes of Metroid and sees you traversing the environment and locating a slew of upgrades and items that help you along the way. When it comes to combat, it is really satisfying, and killing the xenomorphs is thrilling. However, xenomorphs are not the only enemies to fight. There are androids, facehuggers, baby xenomorphs, and soldiers to deal with as well. To switch it up, there are also several bosses throughout the adventure that will test your skill, with the most memorable being one that recreates the battle between Ripley and the Alien Queen with a power loader from Aliens. One of the best things about the game has to be the several options you have when it comes to tackling enemies. From the smart gun to pulse rifles, shotguns and grenades, each have their role to play, with another great feature being that they can all be upgraded as well. Aliens Infestation will last you about 6 hours, and although that might seem short at first, each of the 4 marines have their own unique story, so you can easily quadruple that number. Despite the linear nature of the game, this is a solid adventure that every DS owner should have in their collection. A while before Elite Beat Agents, a charming game known as Ouden came out for the DS. The game, which sold about 5 copies in Japan and was imported by about 10 Americans, featured male cheerleaders whose goal was to provide help to those who needed it. Featuring comic-like art and a good sense of humour, it proved to be very fun and a surprisingly addictive world to step into. Well, Nintendo got the message, and soon enough Elite Beat Agents, a North American sequel of sorts, was announced. It's essentially a rhythm game with a twist. For starters, you're actually doing things for a reason. You go through the adventure as the Elite Beat Agents, who are a squad of civilians who take on any job, no matter how big or small. From taking care of children to curing illness and even saving Christmas. Throughout each song, you'll see numbered circles appear called hit markers, which need to be tapped to the rhythm of the song. Say you're looking at a circle with a 1 on it. Well, outside of circle 1, the outline of a second larger circle will appear, shrinking, closing in, and when that outline becomes the size of circle 1, you have to tap it. There are a few different scores you get from tapping the circles on time, and the more accurate the timing, the higher your health bar, which is constantly decreasing stays. Now there are 2 other aspects that make up the core gameplay, the first being phrase markers that see you dragging your stylus along a predetermined path, and spin markers, which literally sees you abusively scribbling circles around the touchscreen. The gameplay is incredibly simple but continuously fun. Thankfully though, there are a few levels of difficulty for you to select. I can fully recommend any DS owner to check this one out. The charm and level of confidence it exudes will likely infect anyone who plays it. Mega Man Star Force serves as a sequel to the popular Battle Network series on the Game Boy Advance, which takes the original formula and adds several interesting additions that help it feel like something new, but at the same time a natural progression of what came before. It sees you taking up the role of Geostellar, a young boy whose father was stationed on a space center which has mysteriously vanished. Geo is struck basically senseless by this. He stops going to school and turns emo. Okay, not really, but sorta. His fortunes change, however, once he meets an alien and fuses with him to become Mega Man, giving him the courage to find his father. Now, as cliche as the story sounds, the gameplay practically steals the show. While you still have to navigate through a few maze-like areas like in Battle Network, this time around you have some touchscreen minigames as you progress. This can make things quite a bit more interesting when you're trying to move to fight a boss. And when you're not fighting bosses or progressing in the story, there are a ton of tiny, amusing submissions that you can do to kill some time. As for the battles themselves, they are 100% better in my opinion. No longer are you on a 3x6 grid moving in all directions. This time it's 3x5 and you can only use the 3 panels in your row. It seems like a step backwards at first, but it's more than made up for. A targeting system that would seem doomed to fail lets you move directly to your opponent to strike. Now you can hit your opponent from anywhere with the right timing. The fighting's based mainly around the cards you collect, which is good because it makes hundreds of different combinations possible. Your battle style shows through the cards you use, and you can get seriously powerful as you progress by getting better cards. All in all, both forms of gameplay add up to a seriously fun time. Mega Man Star Force was really a good step up from Battle Network. Not a huge step, mind you, but a significant move in the right direction. It's a necessity for any fan, but even if you haven't played the other games, it's still a great idea to try it out. Now when it comes to horror games, the DS wouldn't exactly be my first choice. Sure, there were a handful of great games, but one that never really got the recognition it deserved has to be Dementium. It sees you waking up in a derelict hospital, with each of the hallways and rooms in utter disarray. As the player, you know nothing about how you got here, and all you have is a notebook with a chilling message written on one of the pages. Why did you do it? The only thing you know for certain is that you need to book the fuck out of there as fast as you can. But as with most survival horrors, you're not the only thing lurking through the corridors. Scattered throughout the hospital are various enemies, all of them extremely gruesome. They are mutated experiments gone terribly wrong, and you must use the weapons you find throughout the hospital to destroy them and attempt to find your way out of the madness. From crowbars to guns and bats, you'll find yourself coming across many items that will help you along the way, but just as daunting as the enemies are, so are the several puzzles that litter the environment. The best thing about them is that they actually offer up a challenge and require you to think on your toes as you try to balance taking on enemies and figuring out how to progress. Now, as with any other horror game, sound is a huge part of the overall experience, and thankfully Renegade Kid went above and beyond by providing some of the most nail-biting music and effects you'll ever hear on the DS. From distant screams that slowly grow louder to the creepy and raspy breathing of enemies, it all manages to add to the overall feeling of dread that permeates the entire adventure. Unfortunately, there is an aspect of the game that might have the potential to piss a few people off, and that is the save system. Now the good thing is that you can save anywhere you like, but if you were to die, you'll be sent hurtling back to the start of the chapter, with any of the items you collected along the way now gone. Personally, it never bothered me, as I always feel with survival horrors that there needs to be a constant looming threat. Because of this though, it won't be for everyone, but if you're the kind of player that enjoys a challenge and some good scares to boot, it is well worth checking out. Race Driver Create and Race offers up one of the better racing experiences on the DS. There are 32 different tracks for the player to get stuck into, each one offering its own unique challenge and driving style to master. You can play alone in the time trial mode, or battle it out in various tours against several AIs. This is simply what the game is all about. It's pretty lengthy as well, as all of the single player content will take an average player up to 6 hours to complete. But what helps it stand out against the competition and helps it live long long past its initial burst of content is the way it allows you to create your own tracks. Now there's a surprising amount of depth to this mode, with plenty of options that help bring your ideas to life. Feel like creating a drag strip or maybe a drift circuit, it can all be done and soon becomes one of the most engaging aspects of the game. Visually, this is where Race Driver Create and Race begins to shine. The graphics are very well done with lots of little details. The decals on your car are sharp and readable, and everything right down to the accent lines are defined. When you steer, some of the tires stick out of the wheel well, sliding produces some smoke, and going off-road makes little pieces of dirt fly up around you. The environment is also well defined, with trees outlining Grand Prix tracks and a tall cityscape towering over you in street racing. These are definitely some of the nicest looking graphics on the system. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the sound, which is very lacking. All of the cars manage to sound the same, which may disappoint racing enthusiasts, but at least they all feel different when it comes to handling. Overall, if you're willing to overlook some of its shortcomings, Race Driver Create and Race is one hell of a good time. Over the years, classic mythology has always been a huge inspiration for all manners of media, from games to films, TV and books. There's tons of adventures that are based on various historical figures, but one that really stands out is Glory of Heracles on the DS. It all starts when your main character, an armoured hero with a mysterious past, discovers about his own mortality. Soon he meets other people who seem to share the powerful gift as well, and they all decide to investigate what's going on. Obviously, this isn't based on a true classical myth. Apart from Hercules, many other unique characters eventually join your party, and each of them seem to have unique skills and stat growth as well. Oddly, there are no classes in the game, but depending on the equipment that you give to your characters, their best usage may heavily differ. Almost everything you equip to your characters actually changes how they perform on the battlefield. Equipping a character with a healing potion would instantly heal them whenever their HP is low, and some pieces of equipment grant your characters a bonus. Surprisingly, this gives a whole new interest to a predictable equipment system. Usually people would just go in and equip whatever gave them the highest stats, but what if your second to best sword gives you access to an amazing spell? It all comes down to decisions, and there are tons of strategies to follow on the field. Eventually you're bound to find all kinds of different enemies, each with their particular strengths and weaknesses to overcome, and this is where magic starts to matter. Since every foe has an easily checkable weakness, the best way to take them down is to use that very same type of magic. Do it and you'll certainly achieve the best possible damage. But the mechanics here available aren't that simple. Instead of simply throwing you a system where all that matters is MP, in order to cast spells you'll also need to have points of that particular element. If you're on the lookout for an extremely engrossing RPG with a unique twist, and plenty of challenge and rewarding gameplay, Glory of Heracles is a solid choice. Much like the name suggests, Mario Hoops sees everyone's favourite plumber taken to the basketball courts, but it is far from your classic basketball game. It takes elements from Mario Kart and combines them to form one hell of a game. There are no rules, no boundaries, and only 3 players per side, all of which are initially made up of well-known Nintendo mascots. The game is spread over 4 cups and several colourful courts where the ultimate aim is to outscore the opponent, but not in the traditional sense. To win you must have the most coins that can be obtained by throwing the ball into the ring or dribbling on the famous question mark squares. The controls are touch based, but the movement of your character is controlled by the D-pad, and at first this can feel a bit clunky, as it is difficult to move in every direction. To pass the ball to a teammate, you simply swipe the stylus across the touchscreen, and to shoot you can run up to the ring and at the same time swipe up, producing a slam dunk. Dribbling the ball simply involves constantly tapping on the screen, and this is used to collect coins and items from the question marks. The touchscreen controls are almost spot on, but some occasional mistakes like shooting when you meant to pass occur throughout the game, but it's nothing that ruins it overall. Something that needs to be mentioned is the game's AI though. Now, the problem with the AI is that it lures you into a false sense of security, and before you know it, you're competing against godlike opponents. In the first few cups, the AI is barely responsive, and pretty much a pushover. In the last cup, however, you're met with a steep challenge, one that had me sweating at times. While not a major issue, it does make the latter part of the games feel tiresome, and the retry screen will become imprinted on your eyes. Although Mario Hoops' eventual difficulty is unfriendly to casual gamers, those who are up for a challenge will most likely enjoy what it has to offer. The first Chibi Robo for the GameCube delighted players with its cast of quirky characters, solid gameplay and unusual charm. Though well received by critics and players alike, it didn't gain much popularity with most of the general public. As the game's tiny robot hero Chibi Robo, you were assigned to clean and take care of a dysfunctional family's household. But what seemed like a slow-paced and dull game at first quickly turned into an incredibly endearing adventure. The DS release once again stars Chibi Robo as the hero, albeit a different model than the one you may be familiar with in the GameCube version. This time around it sees you restoring a rundown park and making it flourish with flowers and plants again. However, the game's villain, Sergeant Smuggler, and his toxic smugglings will stop at nothing to hinder Chibi. When you begin, nearly 80% of the entire park is covered in sand. The objective is to use Chibi's handy squirter to water the flower buds until they mature and become full-grown flowers. This is accomplished by stroking up and down on the touchscreen, and it works extremely well. After the flower is fully grown, it can sprout seedlings by the use of your boombox. To use it, you must spin the record on the touchscreen to a certain beat which will produce a song. The more accurate your tempo is with the beat, the more seedlings the flower will produce. Now if the concept of watering flowers sounds incredibly dull to you, don't worry, as Chibi Robo has another trick up his sleeve, and that is customization. To help you do this, you'll come across 7 toys who lend their assistance to help you in your quest to restore the park. They'll help you design certain features, such as adding trees, shrubbery, as well as tiling the sandy square units to turn them into soil, and each of them end up being a nice diversion from the main objective. Chibi Robo Park Patrol is a must for any DS owner. Solar to Robo serves as a spiritual successor to the ill-fated Tail Concerto, and takes many aspects from that game and builds upon them in meaningful ways. The world is inhabited by dog and cat people who live on floating islands in the sky above a sea of plasma in a sort of steampunk-inspired setting. It's not long until you're introduced to the main character Red, who works as a hunter and is essentially who one would go to when odd jobs are needed to get done. Now the story seems pretty tame at first, but the game's characters are what help the game along and keep you interested, which eventually leads to the game having an excellent build-up in its plot. I won't spoil anything here as this is easily one of the best aspects of the adventure. Now when it comes to gameplay, it's all split up into a series of quests which require you to have a certain hunter rank in order to undertake. There's many ways to increase this rank, but the most likely will be the ton of side quests which accompany the main path. It's here that you get a lot of the character interactions which really help Solar to Robo shine. Now much like Tail Concerto, the concept of lifting and throwing plays a huge role in the game, both in and outside of combat. To make this possible, Red is the owner of a mech that can be fully customized and equipped with several skills throughout the game. With it being an RPG, you can also expect to be leveling up Red as well, and there's several stats to consider, such as attack, speed and defense, that once increased all have a noticeable effect out on the field. Now one of the best things about Solar to Robo is how it blends many different genres together. Not long into the game you gain access to 2 types of quests that see your mech either taken to the skies or fishing for giant mechanical fish. The first is easily a highlight and provides some of the more enjoyable moments the game has to offer. You'll find yourself soaring through the skies with only your fuel limiting how far you can go before you need to land. Unfortunately, it's not all lollipops and rainbows. Solar to Robo suffers from an extreme lack of difficulty, which can make playing through the game a bit of a chore for veteran fans of the genre, but the overall charm and atmosphere of the adventure more than make up for this. In my eyes, it's quite easily one of the best RPGs on the DS, even with the few issues that hold it back. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and tickle that bell. You can also follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos, as well as join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, NSG Reviews and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos and giveaways for as little as $1 per month, you'll find all of the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.